French painter Pierre Bonnard emerged in the twilight of Impressionism and in the birth of Cubism. Traditionalists have sometimes viewed his lush interiors and sensuous nudes as portraits of hedonism, but a new retrospective reveals the complexity and mystery underlying their surface. Bonnard is currently on exhibit at New York's Museum of Modern Art. John Elderfield is Deputy Director for Curatorial Affairs and Chief Curator at Large at MoMA. I am pleased to have him on this broadcast to talk about Pierre Bonnard. Welcome, sir. It's great to have you here. Thank you. I had a chance to visit with you on Wednesday to see this. It's interesting to me because I knew very little about Bonnard, and I think that puts me with a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that, he's one of these people who either some people know the name or have seen one or two pictures, but, the work really isn't very well known at all.
Tell me how you place him in sort of the sweep of both in his own time, a friend of Matisse who liked his work, some competition and some disdain from Picasso, an impressionist who did things a little bit different. Put him in context for us.
He's almost exactly the contemporary of Matisse. He was born 2 years earlier and died around the same time, so he's of that generation. What causes, I think, the problem is that he was actually so successful early on in the 1890s that many people think of him as virtually a 19th century painter. Yeah. But the thing is that the really important work, the great things, I think, are much later, from the teens and the 20s and the 30s. So that he's working at his best at the same time as Mondrian, same time as Surrealism. Yes. So it's a strange career. And I think that, it's because of that that people haven't quite figured him out enough.
Tell me about him, kind of early influences, grew up in Paris, who influenced him, what kind of painter was he, what kind of school did he have, his personal life shaping his art?
A kind of high bourgeois family, very well off, very respectable. He became an artist, against his father's wishes, but was successful early on. Influenced by Gauguin, by Japanese prints, and also, I think, by, a kind of curious obsessions. When he was in his 20s, he met this young woman, and this extraordinarily intense relationship developed, and she became the principal subject of his paintings. And around 1900, he's making these, very sensual, erotic paintings of her, and then she remains, in effect, the muse all the way through.
And her influence on him other than as subject?
The two of them became extremely reclusive. He, I think, was retiring in any case. She was rather wild, and I think he enjoyed the fact that she was not respectable like his family, and it was great for him to have somebody who, so it meant he didn't have to mix with his family so much because they didn't like Martha. Yeah. But as the years passed, she became so reclusive that she was, somewhat paranoid. She refused to have people in the house. And she developed a cleanliness obsession.
Took baths all the time.
And she took baths all the time. And she spent a lot of time in the bathroom, powdering herself, bathing. And this eventually became, surprisingly, one of the great subjects of Bonnard's paintings. And it's an unusual subject.
Was he subject to this notion that he was a hedonist, that somehow that what you see and reflected here is the work of a hedonist?
He suffered from that in his lifetime. That people really thought that he was a kind of soft painter. And in fact, when people wanted to insult Matisse, they would say he's gone like Bonnard.
Yeah. And Picasso called him a piddler.
Yeah. Picasso had no patience with this kind of painting. Picasso was someone who he liked to get the image down as quickly as possible, as directly as possible. Bonnard wanted to work slowly on his pictures, and sometimes he worked on them over years.
There's a great story I once heard somewhere about Bonnard, that he was so unhappy with one of his paintings that he wanted to either bribe or detract the guard at a museum so he could go in and touch up the painting.
Yeah, and apparently this is what he did. He was always trying to get paintings back to rework them, and in this case, apparently, he actually got someone to pull the guard to one side and had his little paint box with him and touched up.
Can you make an argument, though, that because of the juxtaposition of time, as you said, I mean, he was an impressionist, a first modernist, that in a sense, because Cubism, Braque and Picasso and Cubism was coming on so strong, and then Mondrian and others, that in a sense, he was not as inventive and not as for the lack of a better expression, pushing the envelope as other painters were?
I think that until he became suddenly aware in the teens of Cubism, of what Matisse was doing, I think it really woke him up. You know, that at that time, up to that point, he was sort of coasting.
Right.
He was doing really nice pictures, and then it was suddenly as if, you know, he saw things like collage, you know, people putting in pieces of paper into their pictures and creating dissonances and so on. And I think that this is one of the things which really caused him to be more adventurous. And in the late teens and 20s, he does become far more adventurous in how he composes his pictures, the kind of colours he will put into them, and the kind of optical effects that he'll create.
The women in his life. There was Martha, who, when he met her, lied about her age. And he didn't discover it until he married her?
That's right. And, I mean, they started to be together in the middle 1890s and were together, as it turned out, you know, all the rest of her life. In the late teens, around 1920, he met a young woman called Renée Montchati.
A blonde.
Who was an art student. And he and Renée had an affair. And it became so serious that he went to see Renée's parents and proposed that, in fact, they got married. And the parents agreed. I think, you know, that by that time, Martha was starting to get really reclusive and difficult and was obviously so dependent upon Bonnard that in the end, I think he felt he couldn't not be with her. And as a result, he broke off the affair with Renée and married Marthe in 1925. And 1 month later, Renée committed suicide.
And what impact did that have on Bonnard?
I think that for both Bonnard and for his wife, this was a really shattering experience. And I think that they must have felt some shared responsibility for the death of this woman. And I think it had the effect of enclosing the world. You know, at that point...
Which was already reasonably closed.
It was always already reasonably closed, but at that point you really have the sense that things really start to close down. And there's a kind of claustrophobia about it. And I think this is one of the strange things about these pictures. And once you look at them at first, and there's this great colour, this light, and then you're looking for a bit and you think, everything's not right here. You know, and there's this sort of sense of unease about some of them.
You know what else interests me about him is that he did not paint on an easel like most people that we think of with an easel and with a canvas stretched across an easel.
No, he pinned the canvas on the wall, and
just on a flat wall.
Just on a flat wall,
and not just one, but several.
Yeah, several, and sometimes he had one big piece of canvas with several pictures on it. Yeah, and he worked on them so long. And he also he had a car, and he would go make trips, and he would roll the canvases up, put them in the back of the car, and then he would get them out in hotel bedrooms and work on them there. And just keep working on these things for, you know, months and sometimes years. And it's a sort of, and also he worked from memory. He didn't work directly from any of these subjects. He made
sketches.
He made small pencil sketches and then went to the studio. And it's a funny thing. You have the sense that he's got his back to the world and looking at these things on the wall. Yeah. So when you see the pictures, you see, you know, these are of open rooms, they're of landscapes, but actually when he was painting them, he had his back to the subject. And I think this also is something which must have been for him part of the oddity of it. I mean, you imagine him there working away, adding little bits of colour, and you know, as you said earlier, he had this idea that the picture could go on, and you know, even when it's sold to somebody, he goes around to the house and touches it up. And
now, let me talk about the collection and putting it together. How many pieces of paintings?
About 80.
80. Mm-hmm. You have done this in a very interesting way, which is one you some applauded. The first room you go into, the first gallery, is in a sense a kind of chronological thing. It's early stuff. You get a feeling for Bonnard and his work.
Yeah, the first actually the first gallery is the 19th century paintings,
Yeah.
and then you move through two other galleries chronologically until you get to the mid-1920s. So you've then been talked through, as it were,
Yeah.
how Bonnard's development takes place.
So you see the development, and then you see it by landscape,
by
nudes,
subject matter.
subject
Yeah.
matter. And therefore you can see what? What's the advantage of doing that?
I think that, too often exhibitions are done too art historically. I mean, since I'm an art historian, I can say this. Too much according to history and development. And I think when this happens, people tend to walk through the exhibitions more quickly. They say, this happened in 1920, this happened in 1925, and you go through, and you want to get to the end of the story. I thought that this way would be one way of slowing people down, and also by looking at the same basic subjects treated in different ways, I think the kind of obsessiveness of the painting becomes even more obvious.
Right. Let's take a look. Here it is, some early works titled First Tape, Man and Woman. We'll just have you comment on this briefly, John.
Yeah, this is 1900, and this is Bonnard and Mart, within a few years into their relationship. And already, a very strange idea of how to compose a picture with this folded screen in the center dividing off the two figures. And some people have said it's a bit like Adam and Eve with a tree of wisdom in the middle of the picture.
And she's looking away or looking down.
And she's looking down and, in fact, playing with two cats. And it takes a while, I think, for you to kind of figure out what's going on there. And, in fact, as you look at the picture, you realize that, in fact, the whole surface is a mirror, that what we're seeing, in fact, is not directly onto the scene, but a mirrored representation of it.
The next photograph, the next painting, Siesta, the artist studio.
Yeah. And this is, again, Marta, and, clearly is, asleep. And at first sight, it's extremely realistic. And then you start to realize, I think, that that say what looks like a pillow at the top actually looks like an ice floe that's come in from Titanic or something,
Yes.
and that what really looks at first like bedclothes look like clotted cream, and you have this sense of the substances of things sort of shifting as you look at them.
But this is all drawn from a sketch he made.
All drawn from a sketch.
And he could have had there sitting in that bed forever if he wanted to.
Yeah, and I think, what he said was that if you paint directly from a subject, your thoughts about the subject change as you're painting. He wanted to look and remember and then paint that memory.
All right. Next one is Coffee.
And this is a later picture from the 1920s when he's moving very close to the mature painter. And, it's starting to become extremely complex spatially. It's hard to figure out quite what we're looking at. That patterned border on the right, you wonder, is it the side of a doorway? Or is it, in fact, the side of a mirror? And some of the objects are hard to recognize, like that black blob on the bottom. You don't really know what it is.
What that is, yeah. The next one is number 4, Young Woman in the Garden. This is René Manchadi and Mart Bonnard. Date 1923.
Yeah. This is 2 years before the marriage and 2 years before René's death. And clearly you look first and you see René looking at you. And I think it's a while before you notice Marta in the right margin of the picture.
I had to find her when I saw this.
And then you see her looking at René and you looking at René. And it's almost as if there's like linear vision paths are crossing as you look at these pictures. It's a long time before you see there's a dog in the corner of the picture as well.
There's a dog in the left-hand corner?
Bottom left corner.
Yeah. Okay, number 5 is a basket of fruit reflected in a mirror. This is 1944, 1946, so this is
really
right before he died.
A late picture when, and shows how rigorous and, in terms of composition he could be. I mean, you think of, Mondrian's work in looking at this in terms of the great sort of severity, but within it, this sort of, opulence of colour and, again, the mirrored representation, which is something which is, a thing which is very fond of.
Okay, still life. We go from still life to the garden. This is 1936, landscape.
And I think with this, it's, those children's landscape puzzles, where you look at them, you've got to figure out, is there a rabbit in this tree? Is there a fish here? And I think there's that sort of quality when you look at these pictures. You think, what on earth is in here? And you kind of puzzle them out, and you say, okay, there's two birds right at the bottom. There's the two more here. And, you know, I think using devices like that is Bonnard's way of sort of keeping your interest in the picture and making you look longer and longer and gradually make sense of what the representation is.
The next one is Nude Dressing, 1925.
One of the pictures of Marthe, still a relatively early one in terms of Bonnard's development, but you know, one of this whole sequence of bathroom scenes.
Why is she looking down and away?
Nearly all of them do. You know, it's this sense, you know, this almost as if a sense of a woman absolutely self-enclosed and self-absorbed, and it's a strange sort of sense of apartness you get from this, and you wonder, of course, about the relationship. You know, were they're actually estranged, although they were living together. You know, that she never looks up. She's always represented as doing something, you know, in a way which sort of internalizes her.
Yeah, it was a tiny bathroom too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very small. This is another of the bathroom pictures
right.
from. This is from like 1931, 1932.
Yeah.
I
like this.
It's a wonderful picture, and it's very much of the really mature style with a lot of visual sparkle. And, you know, a sense that your eye sort of moves around.
Wow, lots of color.
And you see, like, how the tile work changes color as your eye moves across it. There's parts of it, like the area at the right, where you're not quite sure what's represented. And, you know, it's a sort of wonderful sense of how you kind of puzzle out what's, you know, what's in the picture.
Here is a photograph of the bathroom at La Basquette, the Bonnard house, which was near Cannes.
Yeah, and you see how, you know, how small it is. Also, in fact, it's sort of extraordinary that, you know, there is a modern bathroom in the house at all. You know, that, I mean, it was a very modest house, and Bonnard and his wife lived, in fact, very modestly, but the one luxury they put in was this bathroom for
He
Marthe.
was well known in his time, though.
He was well known, and, you know, he was successful. He, you know, he had famous dealers in Paris, and you know, did really well.
Okay, number 10 is The Table.
Yeah, and this is Marthe again. I mean, I think it's a wonderful painting with these big pools of blue shadow, and it's a little hard to see what Marthe is doing. And finally, you actually catch on that she's actually feeding a dog, which is off to the top left of the picture, but. The way he can sort of simplify and organize these sort of pools of incident, and how he makes your eye kind of move from one to the next around the picture is just a beautiful, beautiful picture.
Next one is the large dining room overlooking the garden, 1934-35.
Yeah, and this a great late painting, and here again, you know, I think you start to puzzle out what actually is in the middle of the picture, that sort of cross shape, and then you realize eventually it's a chair in front of the window. But at first, you know, I think the temptation is to wonder whether it's an artist's easel, you know, with a sort of slide at the bottom. And I think there's some of these sort of references in the pictures like this, that, you know, he's making a picture, and so there's a representation of the painting in it.
The next one is The Large Bath. This is a nude from 1937, 1939.
Now, this is one of the three great late pictures of Marthe bathing. They're, you know, big pictures, 5 feet across, and he worked on them obsessively in these sort of small dotted brushstrokes.
And did he paint some of these after she died?
There was one of them which he began the year before her death, and then he kept on painting it until the year before his. So it's worked on for 4 years. Yeah. And it's an extraordinary picture because, I mean, even without knowing that biographical information, you realize that there's something, you know, tomb-like about the picture, and also it's a bit like a bejeweled chamber, you know. So there's like mixture of, in one sense, the kind of opulence of it, and also there's a slightly morbid quality to them.
Next one is a nude in the bathtub and a small dog.
Yeah, and this in fact is the picture which was worked on over this long period, and it's a amazing painting with all this sort of dazzling incident. And obviously the motivation of it is light bouncing around the bathroom, but what he's done with it is you know, extraordinary in terms of colour and dislocation of space.
Private collection or museum?
This is a museum. This belongs to the Carnegie in Pittsburgh.
Okay. Next one is The Boxer. A
very troubling self-portrait done in the early 1930s when Pierre and Marthe were staying in a rented villa in Arcachon in the north of France so that Marthe could go to the local sanitarium. And it's, you know, I think seeing the self-portrait, you realise that what a kind of tensed, difficult existence the two of them lived together.
All right, then finally there is this self-portrait in the bathroom mirror, painted somewhere between 1943 and 1946.
Yeah, right at the end, and some people, in fact, have speculated whether Bonnard had seen photographs of concentration camp victims when he painted this.
Wow. You know, but he does. There's not much to reflect. There's not much to reflect the war, and he was in France in the war.
Yeah, he's living now in the south of France, and in fact the Allies were bombing that area in 1945 and 1946.
But there's no paintings that reflect it?
There's no, except perhaps, well, there are two pictures which actually have blackout curtains painted in the corner.
Yeah. That's right.
But, and maybe this in terms of the kind of austerity of it.
Here is the companion book with this. Bonnard is at the Museum of Modern Art through October?
Yeah, until October 13.
And what's the next great exhibition at MoMA?
Jackson Pollock.
Which starts
also in the fall.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, John. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.